And I think it's important, just to realize that everybody's journey is going to be different. And so I feel like it's important, again, not to shame someone for not getting there as quickly as someone else, right? It's just going to take something different for every person. And I think that there needs to be space for that. You have to give yourself that space, and other people who are not living your life have to be careful and learn how to give people space.
Welcome to Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan. This show is about making the world a more loving, accepting, and compassionate place, one parent, one person, and one child at a time. The key to raising healthy and engaged kids is for parents to seek the same in their own lives while striving to be the best versions of themselves each day. No matter who you are or where you came from, with increased awareness, you can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint for your children, your family, and all those you care about, while living your own life to the fullest. Today's show is Fall and Recovery, Raising Children with Disabilities Through Lessons Learned in Dance with Joann DeSimone. Joann is a graduate of Hunter College with degrees in dance and special education. After dancing professionally with companies including Jose Limon and Diane McIntyre, she dedicated her life to teaching children with disabilities and supporting families. Currently, Joann is a special education advocate for the Alliance of Private Special Education Schools of North Jersey. Her writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Exceptional Parent Magazine, and The Rumpus, among other publications. She is a contributing author to Barriers and Belonging, Personal Narratives of Disabilities. Joann and her son Sebastian were instrumental in a legislative change allowing students with intellectual disabilities to participate in NCAA D3 intercollegiate sports. Joann has been featured in the Philadelphia Inquirer, on Huffington Post, Live, CNN, and GMA3. And finally, Joann is the author of her new, moving, powerful memoir, Fall and Recovery, Raising Children with Disabilities Through Lessons Learned in Dance. Joann, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me and for that lovely, lovely introduction.
I'm taking a deep breath because I have been with your book the last few days and been with your story. And I have so many places, there's so many things that I want to talk about and hear from you. And I guess the place to start is just to acknowledge what you have accomplished with this story, this narrative, and your life, your life's work. And so it's an acknowledgement. And what was this process like for you?
It was long.
Yeah.
It was a very long process, and in terms of the book, for sure. It took me 6 years to write this book, and then on and off for another 6 years to find a partner to publish it. The wild thing to me, so I always fell back on writing, like as a teenager. That was the thing I did to process what was happening in my life. And when I had kids, I wasn't doing that anymore. So I didn't have that outlet. I wasn't doing that work. But I did pick up writing again when my older son was very young, really as a means to send thank yous to his teachers and therapists. So it was really interesting to me when I decided to go ahead and write this book. It helped me unravel, what was going on and help me process everything. And it was, like art imitating life, imitating art. And the process of writing the book, it hit me like, oh, I can use all these things from my past as lessons to use in my present. And it completely changed my outlook in dealing with conflict.
and through your memoir, it's a link after link after link. And um, one of the major moments of your life that you reveal is the loss of your father, and the context by which there was tremendous loss, while also on an event that is also filled with love and joy. And so there's the teaser for you just to share that, because it seems to me that from my reading, it sets you out on a course of having to reconcile, acknowledge, and hold these two completely opposite intense emotions at once throughout your life.
Absolutely. So, yes, I don't mind the spoilers.
Yeah.
So my father died very suddenly when I was just about 9 years old on the morning of my brother's wedding day. And so it was complete chaos, for sure. And ultimately, what I realized later in life is that I was sitting in the church that day watching my brother get married, and this image comes to me, right? I'm hearing my brother's wedding vows sort of floating into the church air. That cold holy air is the way I think about it. And at the same time, simultaneously sitting next to my mother and listening to her sobbing. And all of these voices are combining together. And it occurred to me much later on that that is what life is. It's love and, it's love and grief
Hmm.
simultaneously. And
Hmm.
those things exist. They can exist. They're not necessarily reconcilable, but there's an acceptance in that, knowing
Hmm.
you can have very conflicting feelings in your life. I was experiencing that while raising my children, but I didn't appreciate it quite in that form until much later, and until I was thinking about dance. Very
Hmm.
specifically, I had performed this dance, Jose Limon's There Is a Time, which is based on Ecclesiastes 3, to everything there is a season. And the whole psalm is talking about these opposite ends of the human experience, is what we were doing on stage. And when I was looking back at that experience, I realized, oh, yeah, that's what life is. That's what the psalm says. That's what we did in the dance, right? There's a time to be born, there's a time to die. Everything coexists.
Hmm. And I love how your book begins with the psalm and how it is organized around it and through it throughout. It's just so poetic. And I was going to ask, from dance to special education, which I know a lot of people said, wait, what? How does that happen? And then to writer, but you've always been a writer, right? It's been one of your creative expressions throughout your life.
Yes. Yes. And, I moved away from that. I think I was actually still doing some writing when I was dancing. And so I think in my mind, yeah, they went hand in hand. I actually sometimes used poems as a means to structure
Mm,
my choreography. So yeah, it's funny. Like these things always made sense to me.
mhm,
They didn't have to make sense to everybody
mhm,
else. I felt. I
mhm,
mean, I was working with children from the time I was very young. I started babysitting at 12. I started teaching gymnastics when I was 14. So working with children was very natural to me. So when I was teaching gymnastics and leaving the world of dance, but I was working with a lot of kids who, their parents ended up putting them in my class. Oh, he has ADHD. Oh, he's really active. The teacher said put him in a gym class. So I had a lot of kids that had one, a disability of some sort. Later on, I started working with kids who were on the autism spectrum. We had special classes that we had for like 3-year-olds and try to engage them in movement. So it seemed like a natural progression to me because I was really enjoying the time I had in the classroom with these kids, and I thought, you know what? I want to understand it a little bit better. I want to know what I'm doing instead of just feeling like I'm having some random success. So
Mhm.
that didn't feel like such a big leap to me.
Mhm.
And the writing, transitioning back into that, it was not something that I ever thought I would do. But, I'm definitely one of those people that others would
Mhm.
say, "Oh, you have to write a book," and
Mhm.
I'd say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." But
Mhm.
I had a friend who worked for the New York City Board of Education, and she was teaching a college course for women who were going on to be special educators, and she asked me to come in and talk to them about my parent experience, and they just looked at me at the end of this and said, "You have to write a book." And again, I laughed it off. I said, "Sure, in my spare time,
Right,
I'll
right,
do that."
right. You don't have enough. You wouldn't have enough on your
Right,
plate. Right.
exactly. But, after maybe the third time,
Mhm.
I started to think, maybe I should, because as an educator, I thought it would be important for other educators to understand what's going on inside of, some parents and things that we don't normally divulge.
Mhm.
A lot of times teachers
Mhm.
are like, what's up with this parent? Or, we get the wrong impression of parents
Mhm.
and we get labeled, and
Right.
I thought, I think it's important. It's important to understand what you're dealing with, as a teacher. So,
Mhm.
there's more compassion.
Mhm.
I have this privilege of having sat on both sides of the table.
Right.
And so, when I work with parents in advocacy role, I try to help them imagine also the teacher side of it
Right.
so that there's less of a us
Mhm.
versus them mentality. We're
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
sitting at a table and there's a way to work together, but you
Mhm.
have to be able
Yeah.
to think about what other people are dealing with in the moment as well.
You do have a unique perspective. And I want us to talk about that perspective and talk about your boys, now young men, who have
Yes.
so influenced your life. And before that, I just want to make one more comment about you talked about dance choreography, and as you said that, your the your book came to me right there your book is choreographed as I now see it from the psalm at the beginning to how the different verses of the psalm are throughout in the different chapters, how you often start with a dance memory experience, life lesson that's then woven into whatever phase of life you're telling us about is completely choreographed in a beautiful way.
Mm, thank you. Oh, that's wow. You can't predict or control in any way how people perceive your work.
Hmm.
So it's just
Hmm.
lovely to hear. Thank you.
Let's ground for everyone, um, your unique experience with first just with Benjamin, before we even get to Sebastian, and
Sure.
that is, and back with, and for any parent who is dealing with a child with disabilities at any phase of life, we all know you're just holding on and trying just to get understand what's going on, partly at times in shock of what you can't even process what you're being told by the medical community or not being told or should be being told. And then you're dealing with all of the interventions and tests and just day to day. So I'm going back to the idea of you being able to realize life is about holding the pain and the joy. It takes a while to get there when one is
Yeah,
in the muck of it all.
that is completely true. Yes. I'm thinking about even, and as an observer, right? Like I've seen friends in pain. And I feel like there was a time in my life where my first, you know, reaction would be like, don't cry, don't cry, And I'm
Mhm.
like, yeah, you gotta cry.
Yeah.
You gotta cry.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Benjamin Benjamin was born in 1999, before there was, we didn't even have a computer or internet,
Mhm.
so we everything seemed perfectly fine. And then we took him to his 1 week checkup, and the doctor put the measuring tape around his head and said, "His head's a little small." And then he looked at me and he said, "But your head's a little small. So, maybe it's no big deal." And then he sort of said to my husband on the side, "I hope I didn't insult your wife," and he was like, "No, no, no." And I wasn't insulted, but immediately in my body, I was terrified because I just knew something was not going to be right. Like, this was not going to be the journey I expected it to be.
Mhm.
And, you know, we just sort of went along for the first few months. By the time he was 2 months, it was like, yeah, still head small. Maybe you should go and get a baseline checkup with a neurologist. And that seemed fine. Come back later. But by the time he was 3 months, even though the doctors thought everything was okay at the moment, I could see that he wasn't making any developmental progress. So, as someone who had spent a lot of time with kids, who was a special educator, even though I hadn't worked a lot with infants, I just I could see there wasn't a lot of change. So I was very suspicious at that point. And then when he was 4 months old, it all like just hit the fan. Okay, we have to do all this testing, and none of it, was what we had hoped for. When he had his first CAT scan, the doctor left a message on our like on our answering machine on a Friday afternoon, just saying there are several abnormalities, including enlarged ventricles and pachygyria. And I was like, what does any of that mean? And how do you
Mhm.
leave that message on the phone for somebody?
Right.
And ultimately, after we switched doctors, we came to get this diagnosis of lissencephaly, which is literally means smooth brain.
Mm.
So it's classified as a neuronal migration disorder. So the cells just don't migrate properly, and they don't have all the convolutions on the outer part of the brain that you're used to seeing when you look at the picture of a brain. And there were no real answers. At that stage, the life expectancy for a child with lissencephaly was 2 years.
Mm.
So now we were, not only dealing with, oh, there's disability, he's not going to live very long. And what do we do with that? What do we do with that information? How do we manage it?
Mhm. And that was just the beginning.
It was
And,
just the beginning.
right, just for listeners to know the layers of diagnoses that ensued as he grew. It I mean, there's so many medical terms, right? And all the choices that you needed to make of being told to do one thing, but your gut said to do another thing. Um, and a good spoiler alert: Benjamin's 25 years old, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to set the stage for folks that's how these things started, and then you are decide through a lot of trepidation and understanding concern and a lot of consultation. Can this happen again? We want to have another child, and you're pregnant. Benjamin's 4, and I thought it was so poignant and powerful that when you went for one of the sonograms, you realized that who would later become Sebastian had more motor abilities in utero than Benjamin did at age 4.
Yeah, that was a moment. It's interesting to me that, yeah, that you focused on that, because it was a significant moment for us, for sure. We had the sonogram, and fetal Sebastian was sucking his thumb, and that was something that Benjamin couldn't do.
Hmm.
And it was quite the moment, good, because we thought, okay, this is indicating that Sebastian does not also have lissencephaly, but it was also heart-wrenching because
Mhm.
we're thinking about Benjamin and all of his challenges and making these comparisons, which, I definitely, you realize comparisons are evil. They're evil things. You
Mhm.
can't feel
Mhm.
good when you're making comparisons. When I think about Benjamin, and it's what any therapist, we're telling us early on, right? Like, don't compare him to anybody else. Compare Benjamin to Benjamin, and that's definitely something that I had to remind myself of frequently,
Mhm.
starting then for sure.
Mhm.
You just, it's a difficult thing to do, but I think for mental health, it's
Mhm.
something that has to be remembered.
Mhm. Well, and one of the things that you have become known for in your writing, with especially with that initial blog, was saying the things that people are experiencing in an honest, I think some people would even say, I don't know, brutal honesty, right? Like direct honesty about the things that everyone who is experiencing anything like this is feeling, but don't feel like they can say. For example, I love also how you had dialogues of people asking questions and then what you were really thinking and wanted to say, and then the version that would make it okay for them, and probably in some ways make it seem kind of okay for you in that moment.
Yeah, it's a game, right? That you play
Mhm.
in your head. It's very interesting to me. So, I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn in an, Italian Brooklyn household, and there was no hiding your feelings in that kind of
Mhm.
environment. So this was very natural to me. It's just the way that I communicate. I'm definitely known amongst my friends as the person who's going to tell you what she thinks.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like, though, as I've gotten older, I've learned that there has to be a filter,
Mhm.
and sometimes you have to take deep breath and process a little bit before you respond. So I've worked at not being so reactive,
Mhm.
but this really got highlighted for me back in 2016. I wrote an article for Child magazine called Bury My Son Before I Die. And in this essay, I was discussing the fact that I had a child that might die, but I was doing everything I could to keep him alive. And I was terrified about what happens to him if I die first.
Mhm.
To me, this was just a normal type of conversation that I had had with friends and family, anybody, other families who were experiencing the same thing. It didn't seem like such a taboo subject. But the response that I got completely, it shocked me. I had all of these parents writing to me, and the whole thing went viral. But this one mom wrote to me and said, "For the first time, I don't feel like a monster for having all these same thoughts."
Mhm.
And it stopped me. I was so distraught thinking about this mom living my life and then feeling ashamed for having what I considered to be really natural, natural response to really difficult situation.
Mhm.
And it definitely changed the purpose of the book for me. And that was, part of the editing process where I was like, okay, okay, okay.
Mhm.
I have to focus on the conflict and I have to be able to be honest about them so that other parents are not sitting home
Mhm.
like this woman was thinking she's alone in it and that she should feel ashamed for it.
Mhm.
That was just not, I couldn't sit with that.
Expressing what other people are thinking so they feel okay.
Exactly.
They feel like human. I mean, because this is so human, and I think this is where this whole idea of ableism that you hit on comes in, whereas we're not supposed to feel the natural way of feeling in a certain situation because of a programming we have about how things and people are supposed to be. And what that
Right.
says about us as parents, as people, if we don't have things the way they're supposed to be.
It's complicated.
Really
It's
complicated.
complicated. And I wanted I wanted to be honest about the journey that I had. I've read a lot of parent memoirs, and especially more recent ones, I think are very upfront about how they came to understand ableism and how they pushed against that. And I honestly, I think that I was much more medical and educational minded. So that upfront was not part of my consciousness until much later, honestly, until my kids were older and I started following, disabled activists online and
Mhm,
realizing there's a real spectrum of how they think as well.
mhm,
But wanting to understand, of course, their viewpoint with my kids entering adulthood,
mhm,
I wanted to get a good understanding. And I just feel that everyone needs to have a voice, though. I'm not trying to overshadow anybody else's voice. I'm just trying to relay my honest experience.
mhm,
And I think that parents and caregivers need to be validated because if you just say, okay, well, our culture has told me that it's a bad thing to have a disabled child. And how do I deal with that? Okay, I'll push it down. Just push it down. I
mhm,
don't think that pushing down the bad feelings you get because we've been programmed and have all this internalized ableism is
mhm,
going to solve the problem. For me, it's all about actually living in it and
mhm,
accepting that it exists and confronting it and saying, okay, there are times I feel one way. I shouldn't feel this way, but I feel this way. And it's okay.
mhm,
But I always say to teachers, it's human to judge, but don't allow your judgments to guide the way you treat others. Because you have to sort of understand that your judgments are not always going to be accurate.
mhm.
And that you shouldn't just say, like, okay, I know exactly how this person is, and I'm going to treat them will end up being in an unfair way. So
Mm,
I think, again, it's just a conflict.
right.
I say that I live with these unresolvable conflicts. So my way of dealing with these unresolvables was to go by using these lessons that I had learned in dance.
Mhm,
Everything has to exist together. How do you allow it to do so?
mhm. And, uh, yeah, it's like the thing that comes to me is, uh, a book called The Full Catastrophe by John Kabat-Zinn, based on the title is about mindfulness-based stress reduction and all of
Mm,
the work, but the reference is to Zorba the Greek, who would talk about, the full catastrophe, like, the messiness of life. Like, it's like, and the full catastrophe was with like a smile, like it's like this is what it is, and I feel like what you're saying and what your journey has been is how to first become aware of both of those. I mean, back to when your dad passed suddenly, and through the journey with your own children, it is both. And you are this person and you are that person. You feel this and you feel that. And you were raised in an ableist society that has these sort of values, and you're a special education teacher and advocate who is raising two special needs children. It's like it's all of it.
it's all of it. That's life.
That's life. And yeah, I mean, and okay, let's go into the dance now, because and I want to bring Jim into this, who also life was taken far, far too early with him, but what a powerful influence he had on your life. So it's like, here he is, your dance instructor, but I was imagining a dance instructor Yoda who was
Mm.
like just dropping wisdom constantly that you have taken through life.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. So Jim was a teacher I had at Hunter College. And normally, I think you'd go in and you'd have many different teachers. And for some reason, I managed to have him many times over. And he was the one who reconstructed There Was a Time on our dance company, and he danced with the Jose Limon Company. And yeah, he was just chock full of wisdom for sure. He was my mentor, no doubt about it. And through my life, whether I was dancing or not, his voice was definitely in the back of my mind, sometimes for very simple things and sometimes for very, complicated things. But
Mm.
he was always in there. One of the biggest regrets I had in leaving dance was he died young, right after I think I graduated from Hunter. And I had sort of made a promise to myself that I was going to carry his lessons forward. And I thought I was going to do that in the world of dance. And when I left dance, that was the only regret I had. As much as I knew I had to move on to something else, I felt like this was a really essential promise that I had made that I was now abandoning. And that was a hard thing for me to live with. And so when I decided this book was actually going to focus on dance, which it hadn't originally, I realized immediately that this was going to be the way that I was going to carry his lessons forward and be able to satisfy that regret. And then in a larger picture, made me realize, in dance, you learn that everything's connected through space and time. And so I'm imagining this thread in my life with these lessons moving forward and coming in. And that to me was okay, I can define success
Mm-hmm.
by carrying these lessons forward. I don't have to have this regret anymore. Didn't have to happen exactly the way I planned it. It's something else, right? You got to think outside the box, I guess, as a creative.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely opened up a completely new way to embrace what success was to me.
Hmm. And how would you express what it is today?
Yeah, I think for me, it is just about making these connections.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's past lessons, whether it's figuring out how to connect to your community, I think for me, success is definitely being able to hold all these
Mm-hmm.
contradictive ideas
Mm-hmm.
and, sleep well at night. You
Right.
know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that makes me think of this quote I pulled out because it speaks to all of what you are speaking about. The everything, how it's everything, and holding the paradoxes. You wrote, "I often hear parents say they are grateful for their children's disabilities and wouldn't change them for the world. While it's true that Benjamin and Sebastian have made me a better person and a better educator, I could have lived without acquiring such growth. If we play the hypothetical game, I would have changed everything in order to spare them. I love my boys for who they are, but hate the challenges their disabilities give them."
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. It's
That
everything.
says a lot.
It, do-
It
it
says,
does say a lot. And as I read this, I know we haven't told the listeners that Sebastian, who helped change college sports with you,
mm,
um, is on the autism spectrum. And
yes.
so you were on a completely other path simultaneous with Benjamin's path as an educator teaching neurodiverse individuals and now parenting one as well?
Yeah, that was a huge task for sure. I mean, I feel like they were two very separate experiences. And having everything happening, at the same time could be very difficult. Dealing with the medical issues that Benjamin was dealing with, and then the educational challenges that Sebastian was struggling with. It was a lot to manage, and there definitely became a point, where it hit the height of conflict. We were living in Brooklyn, so for me, the height of the conflict was Sebastian literally having nowhere to go to school. They wanted him out of the public school where he was, and we struggled for the better part of a year to find an appropriate private school placement, which we found, except the public school battle we had with them took so long that by the time they agreed to send him, we
Mhm.
lost the placement in the one school we had found. And I was just, it was, yeah, that was the lowest part in my life, feeling like I had a child who had nowhere that he belonged, and dealing with, you know, ableism
Mhm.
in the community. We had an experience at a local drugstore where he wasn't even, behaving poorly. He was just being very physically active. And this woman took great offense and essentially said to me, you should put him on a leash. My dog is better trained.
Mm.
And it was just like that. It was done for me at that moment. I was like, we have to get out of here. We have to leave and find another community and a place where everybody is going to have a real sense of belonging.
Mhm.
And, fortunately, we were able to do that. We had the resources. I had friends who, were able to point me in the right direction. That's not something that everybody has. So we were fortunate. We were able to relocate and truly find a school system that worked for both of the boys. And certainly without those stresses existing, I was able to, you know, go from the low to the high.
Mhm. Mhm. I was also struck by your experience, during the individualized family service plan, um, which is a different version for everyone of a. It's an earlier version in some states of an IEP, which is National and Individualized Education Plan, which I know you have sat on both sides of for years. I have sat on both sides for years, and I you said that experience with Benjamin of receiving the results and hearing about how they were framing everything also made you pause as a educator professional about what, like, how you experienced it and how you might be able to do it differently or better being on the other side. And I just want to share that when our oldest was evaluated and diagnosed with learning disabilities. And this is at a point in my life where I had been doing the evaluating and diagnosing for some time.
Mm.
And I received that feedback. And then also was in an IEP meeting, which I had at the time had been to countless amounts advocating for my clients. To be on that side of it was, we'll talk about all of the emotions coming at once. First of all, the sadness, the loss, as I will talk about the quote death that you write about that happens in those moments. And then realizing, wow, I thought I got it. I thought I was really empathizing and understanding, and how it changed the way I worked from that moment forward on behalf of the families I worked with.
Yeah, that stunned me really early. Yeah, that first meeting, I was like, "Oh, wow." And that also, it was making it very clear to me that my experience in special education was not going to fully prepare me for this experience at
Mhm,
all.
mhm,
And I was teaching Up till Sebastian was about 9, I was still working in early intervention and in preschool special education. And I kept carrying this idea along with me, right? Like Sebastian once had a teacher who it was like every day the note would come home that, he was misbehaving, what he was doing. And it was just, I allowed it to interfere with my relationship with my son. Right? I
Mhm.
was seeing him through her eyes and I was not liking him.
Mhm.
I loved him, but I was not liking him.
Mhm.
And the way, I was able to see that and deal with all of those emotions and say, like, okay, I need to give this kid a break. And I need to be on, his side of it and realize that the teacher has something else going on that is not it's not coming from him. This is coming from her. So I have to see things in light of who my child really is and what he needs and see him for this like wonderful like developing human being
Mhm.
and not be like, oh, you're just a problem that no one can solve. Right? But as a
Mhm.
teacher, I took that as a huge lesson. So parents are not the complaint center. We're not there sitting there waiting for parents to say your kid
Right.
did this, that, and the other. Right? So
Yeah.
I was very clear and I changed my strategy in how I communicated with parents. So, I worked in New York as an itinerant teacher, which meant I was in a general education classroom working directly just with one student that had an IEP. So, inclusive environments are not always, the easiest environments to be in.
Mhm.
And so if I had a student who had a difficult moment, something went wrong behaviorally, I would send that information to the parent as just like a running record. There's no judgment, there's no emotion in it. This is everything that happened. And I would say, this is what happened before, this is what happened during, this is how I addressed it afterwards. And if my strategy worked with the child in the moment, I'd say to the parent, hey, this is what I did, and this worked. Yay. But if it didn't work, I would say to them, have you seen this type of behavior at home? How do you address it? If you have a successful strategy, please share it, right? So now I'm saying to the parent, you're an equal, an important member of this team. You can, add to this moment and help me out. I would also say to them, this is what I plan to do if it happens again so
Mhm.
that I'd have a strategy laid out so that the parent is not hearing, I've hit a wall and I'm frustrated and I give up on your kid. Because I think as a parent, the worst thing is to feel like you've hit the brick wall and there's nothing more you can do and nowhere else you can go. And I
Right.
never want a parent to feel like I'm their brick wall.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, lessons earned. Lessons earned for sure. I wanted to, as we wind down, I want to loop back to the idea of a death. Because again, this is also where I feel your power comes in saying the things that a lot of people either don't want to hear, don't feel comfortable hearing, but those who have experienced raising children with different disabilities understand. And this is what you wrote. The parents of a child with a disability will go through the psychological equivalent of a death. The death of the child they expected to have, the death of the life they expected to lead. It's loss, it's grief. And loss and grief are part of life. Most of us go into this parenting journey not thinking that's what we're going to have to deal with. We think of loss and grief when we lose the lives of loved ones who are supposed to be much older than us.
Right.
But anyone who is raising or has raised a child with a disability, there is a psychological, emotional process of reconciling this unexpected path.
Yes. Absolutely,
Mhm.
yes. And I think it's important, just to realize that everybody's journey is going to be different. And so I feel like it's important, again, not to shame someone for not getting there
Mhm.
as quickly as someone else, right? It's just going to take something different for every person.
Mhm.
And I think that there needs to be space for that. You have to give yourself
Mhm.
that space, and other people who are not living your life have to be careful
Mhm.
and learn
Mhm.
how to give people space.
That's really important. A question on a different episode when we do Q&A for Disability Awareness Month, there was questions about, we have friends, neighbors who have children with disabilities. How can we be supportive? Which is a great question. What you just said is so important. Even if someone now has this knowledge about, it's important to grieve, it's important to be honest, it's important to not sugarcoat it and be ableist unintentionally with our friends, our neighbors, our family members. What's really important is to meet them where they are,
Mhm.
because they are on their own journey of trying to understand, reconcile. And if you just look back in your own life, or me looking back through your life through your memoir, there were many different stages of that for you, right? To come to where the place you are now, and something that would be very comfortable for you to hear from someone now may not have been 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I feel like a lot of what I learned too did come from my experience as a special educator, right? Because that's
Mhm.
how we treat children. Like, oh, you have to meet them where they're at.
Mhm.
So I often think that a lot of things we learn in the field of education applies to every human being. It's not
Yes.
just
Yes.
applicable to children.
Mhm. Before we go to the parent footprint moment question, I was trying to think about how to ask this question, and I'm not actually sure how to ask it, so maybe you can help me. I am hope and connection is very important to me and the work that I do and what I think humans need. And yet, sometimes when we think about hope in situations that are really difficult, it's taken by some as, you're like we're talking about, you're just like sugarcoating this. Let's acknowledge the reality of the situation. So, with that context, I think you have a sense of where I'm going, which is, what is a message of hope in the context of reality of raising children, now young adults with disabilities, that you can pass on to our listeners?
That is a really good question. I have to organize my thoughts.
I had to organize them just to ask it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. I think because initially when you started asking the question, I'm thinking it, hope is not sort of the word I put in my head, even though I think
Mhm.
that that people get that when they read my work.
Mhm.
I think about this journey, right, of having having pain, right? And what I say in the book is pain is not the enemy. It's a messenger. So in dance, if I had an injury, the reality is you have to give it the time and the attention that it deserves. So, okay, I need to ice, I need to take ibuprofen, I need to modify my movement, because the goal is not being able to lift my leg all the way up to my ear. The goal in a dance is to relay the choreographer's story, intent, emotion, to share with an audience an emotion, a feeling, a story. And once you give the pain the time and the attention it deserves, it frees you to then focus on everything else that's working well. Yeah, there's just freedom in that.
Mm.
Fall and Recovery is the title of the book because that's an essential part of the Limon technique. In modern dance, you use gravity in order to generate movement. You have to go down in order to go up. It's like a swing. The swing falls down, goes to the bottom, it rises back up, and then it reaches a spot of weightlessness at the top. And then you come back down, but that gravity, that downward, is not the thing taking you away from the joy. It's the thing that's allowing you to go back up to the next joyful moment. So
Mm.
I think I equate everything to movement.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
when I generalize that idea into how you function in life,
Yeah.
that to me is ultimately saying when it's hard, it's not always going to be hard. And even when it is hard, there are moments you can take a breath and say, okay, what's working well? What's
Yeah.
working well?
Yeah. Poetic.
Thank you.
Okay. Parent footprint moment question, Joann. Here we go. Tell us about a time that you became aware of yourself as an individual, as a parent, or even an awareness of your own parents. And that new awareness had a positive impact on your life, your kids, and or those you love.
When I heard this question, the first thing I thought about was, and it sounds funny to me saying it out loud now, just because I wondered why it hadn't hit me sooner. um, I had like a real aha moment when I saw my mom as a human being and not sort of as the all knowing parent.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back to when my father died. I went to his wake, but I did not go to his funeral. And I was sent away to a cousin's house. But I grew up in this tight Catholic community, and my father was active in the church. So everyone in the parish went to my father's funeral mass. And my only experience of the funeral mass was what was relayed to me from another 9-year-old, my best friend.
Mm.
And I was really hurt and I felt very isolated. And I didn't understand why my mom sent me away on this day that, everyone else got to share. And I was grieving and I couldn't do anything with that grief.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't, I was 9, so I didn't really have it in me to have this conversation with her. And so I stuffed it down and I left it there until I was in college. And one day I thought, I need to have this conversation with her before she dies. And I need to find out why she sent me away. And she said to me, I was not in control at that moment. So I let other people make decisions for me. So
Mm-hmm.
when your cousin said, we'll take her, I let them, and I was like, oh my God, she was
Mm.
a grieving widow. And yes, she
Mm-hmm.
was a mom and she had children to take care of, but she was not at all,
Mm.
in control of this situation. And it just made everything so much better. Like whatever it was I had inside, that confusion completely dissipated because I
Mm.
was like, she's a human being
Mm-hmm.
just trying to do the best she can. And it really allowed me to give her a tremendous amount of grace.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a parent myself, allows me to give myself a lot of grace when I know I'm struggling to make a decision and I might not get it right, but
Mm-hmm.
say, you're just a human being doing the best that you can in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at my kids growing up and thinking, okay, there may be times that they've had in their life where they looked at me and thought, why is she doing this? And part of writing this book is allowing them to get the inside scoop and understanding what I was going through as a human, and hoping that they can resolve in themselves whatever it is that they are holding.
Wow. Your book is about making the links. You talked about early on in our conversation about your version of success is connecting the links. And that is exactly what you did, from the conversation with your mom to understanding in yourself or understanding with your children.
Thank you.
One of your superpowers, for sure.
I wish it on everyone.
Joann, thank you for, really, you put yourself into this book for so many to benefit from, and people will. And at this recording, your book is just about out. So when we release this, it is out. So tell everyone where they can, all the places they can find Fall and Recovery, Raising Children with Disabilities Through Lessons Learned in Dance.
They can find it anywhere books are sold. If you're going online, it will definitely be on Barnes and Nobles and Amazon and Bookshop, and your local bookstores. If they don't have it on the shelf, they can certainly order it. I know that I'm looking online at my favorite bookstores, and it's available online. They can get all information on my website, which is special-educationmom.com. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Best of luck on your next chapter.
I appreciate that. You as well.
All right, everyone. Please send this to everyone you think will benefit from and who you feel need to hear Joann's messages. They are very powerful, and they are very healing, and they are comforting in that we are all human, dealing with a lot, and there is joy, and there is love, and there is also pain, and there is grief. And sometimes it happens in the same moment, sometimes in the same day, same week, but it's all happening, and it's all part of our human experience. Thank you for being a part of our community and bringing your wonderful people to our community. Your 5-star reviews really do matter for us on the show. I'll leave you with the final 2 questions that I always do. Try to be the person you want your child to become, and ask yourself the guiding question: what footprint do you want to leave? This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Strummerman, composed and performed by Pro Tunes. Artwork is by Garrett Ross. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parent Footprint Podcast, and on Twitter at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, go to exactlyrightmedia.com.